1974. Seattle, Washington. A soft drizzle kissed the pavement as students hurried across the University of Washington campus. The city was alive with youthful energy, coffee shops buzzing with chatter, rock music echoing from radios, and young dreams taking shape in the cool Pacific Northwest air. Among those faces was a man who seemed to belong perfectly to this world: polite, handsome, ambitious. He drove a beige Volkswagen Beetle, dressed neatly, and spoke with a calm, reassuring confidence. His name was Ted Bundy. To most people, he was the kind of man you'd trust instantly. The kind who held doors open, helped carry groceries, and smiled with disarming warmth. Women described him as charming, intelligent, and kind-hearted. Friends saw him as a rising star, a law student with a bright political future. No one could have imagined that behind those eyes, so full of life and confidence, hid one of the darkest minds in American history. The 1970s were a time before the word serial killer even existed in the public lexicon. America was still naive, a place where people hitchhiked freely, trusted strangers, and left their doors unlocked. Evil, people believed, had a face: rough, monstrous, and easily recognizable. But Ted Bundy shattered that illusion. He wasn't the monster under the bed. He was the man standing next to it. Bundy's story begins with normalcy. Born in Burlington, Vermont, and raised in a loving home in Tacoma, Washington, there was no single, obvious trauma that created the monster. That's what makes him even more terrifying. He didn't come from darkness. He built it himself. As a child, Bundy was quiet, observant, and curious. But beneath that stillness, something unsettling grew: a fascination with control and manipulation. He learned how to blend in, how to study people's emotions, and how to give them exactly what they wanted to see. To him, relationships were experiments, emotions, tools. When he reached college, Bundy was everything society celebrated: intelligent, charming, and driven. He studied psychology, volunteered at political campaigns, and even worked at a crisis hotline center, helping people in distress. Imagine that for a moment. A man who comforted the suicidal, who saved lives over the phone, was the same man who would soon take lives with his bare hands. That contrast between kindness and cruelty is what made Ted Bundy so dangerous. Evil didn't announce itself. It smiled, it joked, it blended in. By the early 1970s, Seattle's community adored Bundy. He mingled effortlessly at social events, dated attractive women, and impressed his professors. But something inside him began to fracture. A failed relationship, one that wounded his pride and challenged his control, became a spark that ignited his rage. The rejection wasn't just emotional, it was existential. To Bundy, it was humiliation, and humiliation demanded revenge. Soon after, women began to disappear. Young, educated, independent women, the kind who reminded him of his ex. At first, no one connected the dots. After all, disappearances weren't uncommon, and Bundy was the last person anyone would suspect. He was, after all, the man next door. He would often be seen around campus, his arm in a fake cast, struggling with books, asking young women for help loading something into his car. A simple favor, a small act of kindness. And once they crossed that invisible line between the crowd and isolation, they never came back. That's what makes Bundy's story so haunting. It's not just about murder, it's about trust, about how easily we can be deceived by appearances. He weaponized empathy. He used the very traits that make us human: kindness, helpfulness, sympathy, and turned them into traps. When police first began investigating, they had no clear pattern. No witnesses, no suspect. Only one thing seemed consistent: a man named Ted, driving a Volkswagen Beetle. But who could imagine that the friendly, well-dressed law student volunteering in political offices and attending legal seminars was that same Ted? As 1974 turned into 1975, the city of Seattle began to change. The air felt heavier. Posters of missing women covered the walls. Parents told their daughters not to walk alone. Fear, once foreign, became part of everyday life. But still, Ted Bundy smiled. He continued his studies, attended parties, and even joined a political campaign to fight crime. Irony had never worn such a human face. He wasn't a shadow lurking in the dark. He was light itself, blinding everyone from seeing the darkness within. And that's how it began. The story of America's most charming monster. A man who proved that evil doesn't always look like the villain we imagine. Sometimes it looks exactly like the person we trust most. By the mid-1970s, Ted Bundy had mastered a dangerous art, the art of pretending. On one side, there was the ambitious young man everyone admired, intelligent, hardworking, politically active. On the other, there was the predator, calculating, restless, and constantly craving control. This was the birth of Bundy's double life. He knew exactly how to move between worlds. By day, he wore a smile, shook hands, and discussed politics with charm. By night, his mind drifted to darker places, fantasies of domination, violence, and power. What made Bundy so terrifying wasn't just what he did, but how easily he could hide it behind the mask of normalcy. He volunteered at political campaigns, earning the trust of powerful people. He attended law school, studied human behavior, and used that knowledge not to defend justice, but to perfect manipulation. He understood how people thought, what they feared, and how to make them feel safe. Every glance, every word, every gesture, carefully chosen. Every relationship, part of a performance. To his friends and colleagues, Bundy was the model citizen. To his victims, he was the last face they ever saw. At first, even Bundy seemed to live in denial of his growing darkness. He told himself he wasn't like those other killers who acted out of rage or madness. He believed he was in control, that he could stop whenever he wanted. But beneath that calm surface, the urge was growing stronger. He began testing his limits, stealing, lying, watching women without being seen. These weren't random acts of rebellion. They were experiments. Each small crime gave him a rush, a sense of power, and soon, that wasn't enough. Bundy's darkness demanded more. He learned that fear wasn't just a feeling, it was a tool. He realized that people's trust was his greatest weapon. The cast on his arm, the gentle smile, the soft-spoken voice. These weren't coincidences. They were tactics, each designed to lower defenses. He studied his prey the way a scientist studies his subject. And he discovered something chilling. People didn't see what they didn't want to believe. While Seattle's streets filled with missing person posters, Bundy lived a life that seemed completely untouched by tragedy. He attended dinners, laughed with friends, and spoke about his future in politics. No one noticed the cracks in his mask. When he started dating again, his girlfriends described him as loving and attentive, sometimes distant but never cruel. To them, Ted wasn't a monster. He was the perfect partner. That's how convincing his double life had become. But inside, the boundaries were crumbling. Each act of violence made it harder for him to return to normalcy. The thrill of killing, the feeling of absolute control, became an addiction. And like any addiction, it demanded escalation. There's a chilling irony in Bundy's story. While the police struggled to connect the disappearances, Bundy himself joined the very task force investigating them. Yes, the man who was terrorizing the city was sitting inside the meetings discussing how to stop himself. He would analyze the crimes with cold precision, offering insights that impressed others. It was the ultimate manipulation, a murderer pretending to hunt the murderer. The arrogance thrilled him. Each day he fooled the world, his sense of invincibility grew stronger, and the world continued to believe in him. Bundy's intelligence made him invisible. When the police released a description of a suspect named Ted driving a Volkswagen Beetle, Bundy's friends joked about it, because it couldn't possibly be him. He was too polite, too educated, too normal. That's the danger of appearances. Evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it hides in the light, where no one bothers to look. By 1975, Bundy's double life was no longer separate. It was one twisted identity feeding the other. Every smile hid a secret. Every kind gesture masked cruelty. And yet, to those around him, he was still the charming young man with a bright future. No one saw that behind that friendly face was a storm waiting to erupt. This was Ted Bundy's transformation, from man to mask, from neighbor to nightmare. And soon, the illusion would break. Because the double life he built so carefully was about to collapse under the weight of his own darkness. By 1974, the peace of the Pacific Northwest was shattered. In a region known for its forests, lakes, and quiet college towns, young women were vanishing, one after another. No signs of struggle, no evidence left behind. They simply disappeared. It began like whispers. a missing student here, a vanished secretary there. At first, police treated each case as isolated, but as the list grew, a chilling pattern started to emerge. Each woman was young, intelligent, and independent, women who looked like they had their whole lives ahead of them. And then, they were gone. The year began with Linda Ann Healy, a bright 21-year-old student at the University of Washington. She went to bed in her shared house after talking to friends, and by morning, she had vanished. Her bed was neatly made, her clothes missing, and her pillowcase stained with blood. Her friends thought she had left early for class. The police thought it was a runaway case. But in truth, Linda would never be seen alive again. Over the next few months, the disappearances multiplied. Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Jorgen Hawkins, all vanished under eerily similar circumstances. Same demographic, same mysterious pattern, same result. Nothing left behind. Witnesses began describing a charming young man seen near the campuses, polite, well-dressed, with a broken arm or leg. He called himself Ted. He would approach women, asking for help carrying books or loading his sailboat. And then, they'd disappear. The simplicity of his method was horrifying. He didn't stalk in the dark. He didn't break into homes. He hunted in broad daylight, surrounded by people, blending into normalcy so well that no one suspected a thing. It was this audacity that made him unstoppable. By summer, Seattle was drowning in fear. Parents called their daughters every night. Women stopped walking alone. Newspapers warned of a predator, but the details were vague. No one knew who he was or where he'd strike next. And then came the day that burned itself into the city's memory. July 14, 1974, Lake Sammamish State Park. It was a bright Sunday afternoon. Thousands were out picnicking, swimming, laughing, a perfect summer day. Among them was a man in a white polo shirt, his arm in a sling. He smiled as he approached women, introducing himself as Ted. He said he needed help loading his sailboat. Two women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, never returned. 2 abductions, same day, same place, same man. For the first time, the mask of Ted had a face, because dozens of witnesses remembered him. Police finally had a lead, a name, a car, a description. But even then, the truth was hard to believe. When they released the composite sketch and the name Ted to the public, hundreds of calls came in. And among them, several people mentioned Ted Bundy. But the detectives brushed it off. Bundy was too educated, too polite, too clean-cut to be a killer. He was in law school. He had a girlfriend. He volunteered at political campaigns. It couldn't be him. That assumption, that evil has a look, cost dozens of women their lives. As the year ended, the killings moved south. Utah, Colorado, Idaho, the same pattern followed. Women from universities vanished just like those in Seattle. Police in different states began to compare notes, realizing this was no local predator. It was a man on the move, a man who killed across borders, across timelines, with the precision of a professional, but the cruelty of a monster. Bundy was evolving. Each abduction became more daring, each cover-up more calculated. His confidence was absolute. He believed he couldn't be caught. By late 1974, America was beginning to wake up to a terrifying realization that somewhere out there, a serial killer was driving across states, blending into everyday life, preying on the kind of people who never saw danger coming. And the man behind it all, Ted Bundy, still smiled in photographs, attended parties, and went to class as if nothing had happened. The mystery of the vanishing women had become a national obsession. But the truth, darker than anyone imagined, was that the killer wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was walking among them, charming, confident, and utterly invisible. By the winter of 1974, fear had a name: Ted. But who was Ted? And more importantly, where would he strike next? The investigation into the vanishing women had become one of the largest manhunts in American history. Dozens of detectives, FBI agents, and local police departments were now involved. But despite hundreds of tips, they had no clear suspect. Every report, every lead, every name led to dead ends. But in the background, one particular name kept surfacing: Ted Bundy. He matched the description. He drove a tan Volkswagen Beetle. He lived near the university. And he was charming, Too charming. But still, investigators hesitated. Bundy was a law student, educated, well-spoken, and respected. He had friends, mentors, even a girlfriend who adored him. On paper, he didn't fit the image of a monster, and that was exactly how he stayed invisible. While police struggled to piece the puzzle together, Bundy continued to live his double life. By day, he was the picture of success, working at a crisis hotline in Seattle, helping suicidal people find reasons to live. By night, he was out on the streets, hunting, calculating, perfecting his methods. He had learned to control every detail: his tone, his smile, his timing. He understood how to make people trust him within seconds. And when they did, their fate was sealed. In Utah, his charm worked like a weapon. New disappearances began. Melissa Smith, the daughter of a police chief, and Laura Amy, a young student, both vanished within weeks. The pattern was too familiar. The horror was spreading. Finally, in November 1974, luck, or fate, intervened. A young woman named Carol Durant was shopping at a mall in Murray, Utah, when a man approached her, flashing a police badge. He told her someone had tried to break into her car and offered to take her to the station for a report. Something felt off, but she went with him. Inside his car, she noticed no police radio, no signs of law enforcement. When he suddenly tried to handcuff her, she fought back fiercely. One cuff locked onto her wrist, but she managed to open the car door, jump out, and run for her life, screaming for help. Bundy had failed. For the first time, his perfect pattern had cracked. Carol's testimony was a turning point. She described her attacker in chilling detail: the clean-cut man, the VW Beetle, the fake badge. Police began searching for every owner of a tan Volkswagen in the area. And when Ted Bundy's name appeared on that list again, this time, detectives took it seriously. When they visited his apartment, they found disturbing clues: plaster casts, tools, and maps marking remote areas. But nothing that definitively proved murder. Still, Bundy was placed under surveillance. He seemed calm, polite, almost amused by the attention. He even joked with officers, confident that his charm would protect him once more. But the noose was tightening, slowly, methodically. Then, in August 1975, a highway patrol officer spotted a suspicious VW Beetle prowling near a suburban neighborhood late at night. When he stopped it, the driver was Ted Bundy. Inside the car, police found handcuffs, a ski mask, a crowbar, trash bags, gloves, and rope. Not murder weapons, but instruments of something sinister. Bundy was arrested for possession of burglary tools, but investigators knew this was much more. They began linking him to Carol Durant's abduction. When she was shown a lineup, she didn't hesitate. She pointed directly at him. The facade of the perfect gentleman was beginning to crumble. For the first time, Ted Bundy faced justice in a courtroom. Yet even then, he played the part of the misunderstood law student, charming reporters, smiling for cameras, insisting on his innocence. Behind that calm exterior, however, the darkness remained, waiting for another chance. And as police dug deeper, across states, across records, and across missing person files, the same ghostly pattern emerged again and again. Everywhere Ted Bundy went, women vanished. The hunt had officially begun, not just for a man, but for an idea. A terrifying truth that evil can wear a smile, hold a degree, and shake your hand, and still destroy countless lives in plain sight. The police had Ted Bundy in custody, but they didn't yet know they were dealing with one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history. Because for Ted Bundy, this was only the beginning. When Ted Bundy walked into jail for the first time, he didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a law student who had wandered into the wrong side of justice. Calm, polite, clean-shaven. He greeted guards with a smile, read legal books in his cell, and carried himself like a man who believed he was still in control. Because in his mind, he was. Bundy knew how people thought. He had spent years studying psychology and law, understanding how to twist perception. And now, in prison, that knowledge became his greatest weapon. He wasn't just Ted Bundy, the suspect. He was Ted Bundy, the performance. As the Utah trial for the kidnapping of Carol Durant approached, Bundy carefully built an image of innocence. He wrote letters to friends, charmed reporters, and even gained supporters who believed he was the victim of a misunderstanding. He loved the attention. the cameras, the interviews, the spotlight. To Bundy, the courtroom was not a place of judgment. It was a stage, and the world, his audience. He insisted on representing himself in court, something few defendants dared to do. It wasn't about confidence, it was about control. He wanted to face the system as an equal, to prove that he could outsmart everyone, even the law itself. But behind his composed demeanor, something darker stirred. Investigators across multiple states began linking Bundy's movements to a growing number of unsolved murders: Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Colorado. Each state had its own haunting list of missing young women, and every trail seemed to circle back to the same man. But evidence was still thin. The murders were spread across vast distances, each crime scene meticulously cleaned. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no physical proof strong enough to convict. The only thing they had was Ted's arrogance, and it was about to become his undoing. In June 1977, Bundy was extradited to Colorado to face charges for the murder of Karen Campbell, a 23-year-old nurse who vanished from a ski lodge in Aspen. By now, his calm confidence had evolved into something else: a game. Bundy believed he could escape not just justice, but the very walls that confined him, and he would soon prove it. During a pretrial hearing in Aspen, Bundy was allowed to use the courthouse library to prepare his defense. Guards watched from outside as he flipped through law books, pretending to take notes. Then, in a moment of terrifying precision, he walked to the window, opened it, and jumped. 2 stories down, into the cold, mountain air. He limped away into the trees, vanishing into the wilderness. The news exploded across America. Ted Bundy escapes. For 6 days, he survived in the Rockies, stealing food, changing his clothes, even reading the local newspapers that described his own manhunt. But his luck ran out when police spotted him wandering through the woods, exhausted and starving. When he was caught, he smiled. To him, it wasn't failure. It was proof of what he already believed, that he was smarter than everyone else. But Bundy wasn't done, not even close. Transferred to a more secure jail in Glenwood Springs, he began preparing for another escape. He studied guard schedules, noted weak points, and even lost weight deliberately, squeezing through a tiny hole he'd carved into the ceiling of his cell. On New Year's Eve, 1977, while guards celebrated the holiday, Ted Bundy crawled through that hole, climbed into the jailer's apartment above, changed into stolen clothes, and walked straight out the front door. No one noticed until 17 hours later. This time, he didn't run into the mountains. He vanished into America. While police scrambled, Bundy headed south, changing names, stealing cars, sleeping in motels. Eventually, he arrived in Florida, a place far from suspicion, far from his past crimes. But the monster hadn't changed. If anything, he was free to be himself again, with no mask, no pretense, and no limits. What followed would become one of the most horrifying killing sprees in modern history. Crimes so brutal, so senseless, that they would finally expose the true face of Ted Bundy to the world. The perfect prisoner had become the perfect predator, once again on the hunt. January 1978. Florida. The sun shone warm over the sleepy college town of Tallahassee. Students at Florida State University were returning from winter break, their laughter echoing across the campus. Dorm windows were strung with lights, music drifted through open doors, and life felt safe, untouched by the darkness that had haunted other corners of America. But evil doesn't announce its arrival. Sometimes it slips quietly through an unlocked door. Ted Bundy had arrived in Tallahassee weeks earlier, thin, gaunt, and desperate. After his second escape, he'd traveled across states in stolen cars, using fake IDs, living off cash and charm. By the time he reached Florida, he was a ghost, invisible, untraceable, and growing more dangerous with every passing day. He rented a room under the name Chris Hagen, blending into the crowd of students and tourists. Neighbors described him as polite, clean, and quiet. No one knew that the man smiling next door was America's most wanted fugitive, or that his hunger to kill had returned with a vengeance. And on the night of January 15th, 1978, that hunger would explode. It was 2:45 a.m. inside the Chi Omega sorority house. Most of the young women were asleep. The air was still, the halls dimly lit by the soft glow of exit lights. Then, a door creaked open, footsteps echoed down the corridor, and a nightmare began. Bundy moved silently from room to room, armed with a club and his bare hands. He attacked 4 women within 15 minutes, bludgeoning, strangling, mutilating. Margaret Bowman, 21, Lisa Levy, 20, both killed instantly in their beds. 2 others, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, survived, bloodied and broken, but alive. It was violence without motive, pure rage, a monster unmasked at last. When the police arrived, the scene was unspeakable. Blood splattered on the walls, sheets torn, silence heavy with horror. One officer later said, "It was like walking into hell." But Bundy wasn't done. After leaving Chi Omega, he slipped into another apartment just blocks away and attacked a 5th student, Cheryl Thomas, fracturing her jaw and skull. She barely survived. Within hours, Bundy vanished again, melting into the streets as if swallowed by the night itself. The city of Tallahassee went into panic. Students stopped walking alone. Doors were locked, gun stores sold out. For the first time, America began to realize what kind of killer it was dealing with. Not a man driven by greed or revenge, but by compulsion. An evil that fed on control, fear, and pain. Bundy fled north, stealing cars, robbing wallets, sleeping in motels. But his arrogance, the same arrogance that had once made him so confident in court, was catching up to him. On February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, a routine traffic stop changed everything. A police officer spotted a suspicious orange Volkswagen Beetle. Inside sat a thin man with wild hair, pretending to be someone else. When the officer pulled him over, Bundy fought, clawing, kicking, trying to grab the gun. But this time, the law won. After a violent struggle, he was handcuffed and dragged into custody. When asked for his name, he finally muttered, "I wish you'd killed me." But the mask was off. The devil had a face. Fingerprint analysis confirmed it. Ted Bundy, the charming, intelligent, perfect prisoner, was back behind bars. But the true horror of his crimes was only beginning to unfold. As detectives pieced together his trail, they uncovered a map of terror spanning across America. More than 30 murders, maybe more, each as cold and calculated as the last. And yet, through it all, Bundy showed no remorse, only pride. When questioned about the Chi Omega murders, he smirked and said, "You'll never prove it." But deep down, he knew. The game was over. In the coming months, Florida would prepare to put Ted Bundy on trial, in what would become one of the most infamous legal battles in American history. The courtroom would once again become his stage. Cameras would capture his every grin, every manipulative stare. But this time, there would be no escape. And soon the world would watch as he faced the one thing he could never control: justice. June 1979, Miami, Florida. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and spectators filled every seat. But this wasn't just another criminal trial. This was a spectacle, the first murder trial in U.S. history to be fully televised. And at the center of it all sat Ted Bundy, smiling, confident, and disturbingly calm. He wasn't dressed in prison clothes. He wore a crisp suit, neatly combed hair, and that same charming grin that had once fooled so many. He looked less like an accused murderer and more like a man about to give a law lecture, because that's what Bundy wanted the world to see, not a monster, but a misunderstood genius. The charges were clear. He was accused of brutally murdering Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy at the Chi Omega sorority house and attacking 3 others. The evidence? Overwhelming. Fibers, bite marks, eyewitness accounts, a trail that led directly to him. But Bundy refused to see himself as a criminal. He demanded to represent himself in court. The same arrogance that had fueled his murders now drove his defense. It was as if he believed his charm could outwit justice itself. From the very first day, the trial felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a theater, with Bundy as both the actor and director. When he spoke, he smiled at the cameras. When the judge questioned him, he replied with eloquent, rehearsed lines. And when witnesses described the horror of the murders, he stared coldly, his expression unreadable. Reporters compared it to a macabre performance, a killer performing for an audience, manipulating emotion with terrifying precision. But behind that smooth confidence, cracks were beginning to show. The prosecution, led by Larry Simpson, was relentless. They presented photos of the crime scene, physical evidence, and testimony from the survivors. Every image, every detail painted the same picture. The Chi Omega house was Bundy's personal hellscape, a playground for his brutality. Then came the most damning piece of evidence, the bite mark. Forensic experts testified that the unique pattern on Lisa Levy's body perfectly matched Bundy's dental impression. It was science versus charm, cold proof against the smooth lies. When the photographs were shown in court, the audience gasped. Even Bundy's mask seemed to flicker. For a brief moment, the smile faded, but only for a moment. Outside the courthouse, America watched, mesmerized. The trial was broadcast on every major network. Millions tuned in daily, not to learn about justice, but to watch the man who had become a twisted celebrity. Some people even wrote him love letters. Women sent photos, poems, even marriage proposals. To them, Bundy wasn't a killer. He was a mystery. A charming enigma they wanted to understand, or worse, save. And Bundy knew it. He played into it. During one court session, he suddenly turned to his former girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, who sat in the audience. Before anyone could react, Bundy said, "Will you marry me?" Under Florida law, a declaration of marriage in front of a judge constituted a legal ceremony. And just like that, Ted Bundy got married in the middle of his own murder trial. It wasn't love, it was manipulation. One last attempt to control the narrative, to show the world that he was still in charge. But the walls were closing in. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Bundy's smile didn't fade. He nodded as if he'd expected it all along. But when the judge pronounced the death sentence, something shifted. Judge Edward Cowart, in one of the most famous closing statements in legal history, looked Bundy in the eyes and said softly, "It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer, but you went another way, partner." For a moment, perhaps the only moment in his life, Ted Bundy seemed human. His eyes lowered, his expression heavy. Then, like a curtain closing, the mask returned. The smirk crept back, and he was led away, sentenced to die in Florida's electric chair. But even then, the story was far from over. Because while the world believed justice had been served, Ted Bundy still had secrets, confessions buried deep within his twisted mind. And in the years that followed, those secrets would emerge one by one. As Bundy began to reveal the full scale of his horrors, not for redemption, but for attention, the man who once played the courtroom like a stage was about to perform his final act, one that would chill America to its core. January 1980. The walls of Florida State Prison were cold, silent, and suffocating. Behind the thick iron bars sat a man the world once couldn't stop watching, now reduced to a shadow of his former self. Ted Bundy, once the charming law student who smiled for cameras, was now prisoner 33677. He still smiled, but it was different now. Tired, hollow. The mask of confidence was cracking, piece by piece. For nearly a decade, Bundy had denied everything. The murders, the assaults, the disappearances, all lies, he claimed. But as the date of his execution drew closer, the mask began to slip. The charm no longer worked. The courtroom applause had faded. And now, for the first time, he was afraid. Afraid to die. Afraid to be forgotten. In those final months, Bundy started talking. Not out of guilt, but out of bargaining. He realized something terrifyingly simple. As long as he had secrets, he had power. And so, Bundy began to confess. To detectives, to journalists, to psychologists. Each conversation was carefully crafted, every word calculated. He spoke in riddles, half-truths, and chilling details. Sometimes he described murders in the third person, saying, "He did this," instead of "I did." It was his way of keeping control, of staying one step ahead, even while chained to the floor. He admitted to more than 30 murders across multiple states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida. But experts believe the real number was much higher. Some say it could have been over 100. The confessions were hauntingly specific. He described picking up women from college campuses, beaches, and parking lots, always pretending to be injured, carrying books, or needing help. Once they got close enough, the mask came off. The charming student became a predator. He admitted to keeping trophies, jewelry, clothing, photographs, each item a twisted reminder of his control. He even revisited some of his victims' bodies days after killing them. To the investigators listening, it was like stepping into the mind of pure evil, not chaos, but cold precision. Bundy wasn't driven by rage, he was driven by power. He told one journalist, "I don't feel guilt for anything. I feel sorry for people who feel guilt." The words sent chills through the nation. As execution day drew nearer, Bundy's desperation grew. He began confessing strategically, offering bits of information to delay his death sentence. Every confession became a bargaining chip. He hinted at undiscovered bodies, new evidence, more names, anything to keep himself alive for one more day. The FBI, realizing he might be their last chance to uncover the full truth, sent their top profiler, Bill Hagmaier. Their conversations were eerie. Bundy was polite, articulate, even charming, as if they were old friends sharing stories over coffee. But beneath that politeness, Hagmaier could sense something darker. Bundy wasn't confessing to repent. He was performing. Each detail, each pause, was part of a show. One last manipulation before the curtain fell. Then, something unexpected happened. In the final hours before his execution, Bundy broke down. For the first time, he cried. He spoke of his childhood, his strict upbringing, and how pornography had, in his words, destroyed his mind. It was a desperate attempt to rationalize the unimaginable, to shift the blame, to humanize himself one last time. But the world wasn't listening anymore. Outside the prison gates, hundreds had gathered, chanting, singing, even holding signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." The same man who once charmed an entire courtroom was now nothing more than a symbol of horror, manipulation, and evil disguised as ordinary. On January 24, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. Witnesses described a faint smile before the current hit, as if, even in death, he wanted control over the final image the world would see. As smoke rose from the chair, the crowd outside erupted in cheers. For many, justice had finally been done. But for the families of the victims, there was no real closure, only silence. The man who had terrorized their lives was gone, but his shadow remained. In the years that followed, Bundy became more than a name. He became a warning. A reminder that evil doesn't always come with a monster's face. Sometimes it wears a smile, a suit, and a voice that sounds just like yours. When you look at Ted Bundy's photographs, the confident smile, the calm eyes, the neatly combed hair, it's hard to believe that behind that face lived one of history's most calculating serial killers. He didn't fit the image of a murderer. He wasn't wild-eyed, disheveled, or unhinged. He was intelligent, charming, even handsome, the kind of man parents would proudly introduce to their daughters. And that's precisely what made him so dangerous. Bundy wasn't just a killer, he was a psychological illusion. A man who turned the world's expectations upside down. To understand Ted Bundy, you must first understand his obsession with control. Control was his addiction, over women, over the police, over society's perception of him. He didn't just want to take lives. He wanted to prove that he could manipulate anyone, victims, journalists, judges, even the entire justice system. Every smile, every polite sentence, every handshake was a weapon disguised as charm. He studied people, mirrored their emotions, and learned exactly what they wanted to see. In court, he played the role of the innocent intellectual, questioning witnesses, challenging evidence, and performing with the confidence of an actor. At one point during his own trial, Bundy even proposed marriage, in the middle of cross-examination, using an obscure Florida law that recognized courtroom declarations as legally binding. The audience gasped, the judge tried to maintain composure, and Bundy smiled. He wasn't just defending himself, he was directing a show. Psychologists who later studied Bundy called him a classic psychopath. He lacked empathy, guilt, or fear, emotions that define humanity. One FBI profiler described him as a man who saw people as objects, tools for his pleasure and ego. Bundy's crimes weren't impulsive acts of rage. They were planned with surgical precision. He kept souvenirs from his victims, necklaces, photographs, sometimes even body parts, not because he needed reminders, but because they made him feel powerful. Every trinket was proof that he could play God and get away with it. But beneath the arrogance, there was something even more chilling: emptiness. People who met Bundy in prison described moments where his charm would vanish in an instant, replaced by a blank stare, as if the person inside had disappeared. One journalist said, "It was like looking at a mannequin that suddenly came to life, but without a soul." That was Ted Bundy's true face. Not the smile, not the suit, but the void behind the eyes. Bundy's manipulation extended far beyond his crimes. Even in death, he continued to control the narrative. Books, interviews, documentaries, all fed into his myth. Some people were drawn to him, obsessed by his intelligence and calmness, as if he were a celebrity. Others feared that fascination itself was proof of how persuasive evil could be. He blurred the line between horror and charisma, between fear and fascination, and that's what made him unforgettable. When psychologist Dr. Al Carlisle analyzed Bundy's behavior, he concluded something profound. Bundy wasn't a monster because he was different. He was terrifying because he was familiar. He showed us what evil looks like when it hides in plain sight. That was the essence of Bundy's power. He looked ordinary. He reminded everyone that monsters don't always come from nightmares. Sometimes they sit beside you on the bus. They hold your door open. They smile. In the end, Ted Bundy wasn't remembered for his intelligence or even his crimes. He was remembered as the man who broke the illusion that evil has a face we can recognize. He forced the world to look inward, to realize that beneath the surface of civility and charm, darkness can hide quietly, waiting for opportunity, not chaos. Bundy's life was a tragedy of deception, a brilliant mind poisoned by its own hunger for control. He built his identity on manipulation, and in doing so, destroyed everything that made him human. Even today, decades after his execution, Ted Bundy's story still lingers, not because of what he did, but because of what he revealed. That beneath the smiles, behind the masks, and under the polished surface of society, there will always be those who hide their evil behind kindness. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying truth of all. When Ted Bundy was finally executed on January 24, 1989, a crowd gathered outside the Florida State Prison. They weren't there to protest. They were there to celebrate. People held signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn," and "The devil's finally dead." Some even sold t-shirts. As the lights in the prison flickered, signaling that the electric chair had done its work, cheers erupted, echoing into the cold morning air. It was a bizarre moment of collective relief. A nation rejoicing not in justice, but in the end of a nightmare. But even as his ashes were scattered over the Cascades of Washington state, where he had once hidden his victims, Bundy's shadow refused to fade. Because the truth is, his story never really ended with his death. Ted Bundy changed the way America saw evil. Before him, serial killers were imagined as monstrous outsiders, deranged, visibly dangerous, and easy to spot. Bundy shattered that illusion. He was educated, polite, and articulate. He volunteered for political campaigns, attended law school, and dated respectable women. He looked like anyone, and that was what terrified people the most. He exposed a chilling truth, that evil could hide behind normalcy, that a charming smile could conceal a violent mind. The term serial killer itself became part of mainstream vocabulary in the 1970s, partly because of him. The FBI, desperate to understand such predators, began developing modern criminal profiling techniques, interviewing Bundy and others like him to map the minds of psychopaths. Bundy, ironically, helped investigators hunt people like himself. His own conversations with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit inspired parts of shows and films like Mindhunter, Silence of the Lambs, and Criminal Minds. In a way, the man who thrived on deception became a textbook on manipulation. But Bundy's legacy wasn't just about law enforcement. It was about society's reflection of itself. His case forced people to confront uncomfortable questions. Why were so many willing to believe him? Why did charm and confidence blind people to danger? And why, even after his arrest, did some women write letters to him, calling him misunderstood, even handsome? Bundy became a mirror, reflecting humanity's fascination with darkness. He showed how easily charisma could mask cruelty. And in doing so, he revealed something deeply unsettling about human nature: that we are drawn to danger, not just to fear it, but to understand it. Even decades later, his story continues to haunt popular culture. Books, films, and documentaries keep returning to him, not to glorify, but to analyze. Netflix's Conversations with a Killer. The Ted Bundy tapes reminded millions that behind the infamous name was a man who seemed frighteningly normal. Yet the more we dissect his story, the more it blurs the line between fascination and fear. Because Bundy's story isn't just about one killer, it is about how evil can evolve, adapt, and blend into the world around us. In interviews before his death, Bundy tried to shift blame onto pornography, society, even his own upbringing. But his words were just another layer of manipulation. Even in his final moments, he was performing, trying to control how history would remember him. But history did not bend to his narrative. Today, Bundy stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how intelligence without empathy becomes destruction. His life warns us that monsters don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper politely. His crimes changed security on campuses, strengthened missing persons procedures, and pushed the media to report more responsibly on violent crimes. And yet, despite everything we've learned, the same patterns continue. Killers who blend in, deceive, and destroy. It's as if Bundy opened a door to a darkness that has never fully closed. Ultimately, Ted Bundy's legacy is not one of fascination, but of fear. A fear that lurks in the corners of everyday life. A fear that someone, somewhere, could be wearing the same mask he did, charming, articulate, unassuming, and utterly soulless. He wanted to be remembered as special, brilliant, misunderstood, powerful. But in truth, Bundy left behind nothing but a legacy of horror. His name, once synonymous with deceit, now stands as a warning carved into history. That behind every perfect smile could lie an unimaginable darkness. And that is Ted Bundy's final gift to the world, a reminder to never mistake charisma for goodness, and never assume evil will announce its presence before it strikes.